Okay, today my guest is Professor Ingmar Björkman. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Ingmar as a person, Professor Björkman as a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Ingmar Björkman is the new university president at Hanken. He received his PhD from Hanken School of Economics. He was a professor of management and organization and also served as the Dean of Research and Internationalization and head of the Department of Management and Organization previously. Ingmar's main research area is international management with a particular focus on people management issues in multinational corporations. He taught at a number of business schools in Europe and Asia, and has received teaching awards from Fudan University in Shanghai and INSEAD, Singapore. Thank you, Ingmar, for joining us.
Happy to be with you. Thank you.
First question, what did you want to become when you were a child?
Well, I thought I would become an architect. I was into building Legos, and I thought, well, becoming an architect, and I was reasonably good at math. So the career is clear. It didn't turn out that way, though.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in Finland, but grew up in Norway. So I had a Finnish passport, Norwegian mother tongue. I spoke Swedish with my father. So international already from the start, I would say.
And how did you choose academia?
I think for many of us, this is a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence that you cannot explain in some way. My grandfather, on my father's side, he got his PhD in 1931. At that point in time, he grew up in Finland, he was a Finn, and he had to go abroad to get his PhD because he couldn't get a PhD in his area. So I think that having that kind of example and also some kind of role model in the family may have played a role, but then it really had to do with when I was a master's student, I was asked to serve first as a teaching assistant and then encouraged to apply to the PhD program, and the rest is history.
Okay. Something that is not on your CV that people might find interesting about you, like your hobbies.
Well, what I think even a little bit known for in the organizations I've worked is that I'm serving people espressos. So I've had an espresso machine since I was first time at INSEAD as visiting professor back in the 90s. I returned to Finland and realized I can't drink the Finnish coffee, so I need to have proper coffee. So I had an espresso machine in the office. So still as a dean and as a rector / president, I'm always serving people espressos. So that might be something which is not on my CV, but it's very useful because if people get an espresso, they can't ask for a pay rise, can they? They got something already out of the meeting.
Note to self, don't drink anything before a negotiation. Beautiful, thank you. If you stopped doing what you're doing today, what would be the second best career path for you?
I've been in academia all the time, and I was in admin positions for a long time, head of department and so on, and then I was a dean. Not at my alma mater. I was headhunted to become a dean at another business school, the Aalto University School of Business in Finland, and then went back to faculty for 2 years for the first time in 20 years. And now I'm back in admin again, and I enjoy both. So if I were not now the rector, the president of the school, I will probably be a faculty member and fairly happy doing that as well. So research, academia, that is my thing, I would say.
Any regrets in life?
I tend to be really bad at looking backwards. I guess I'm not the kind of person who regrets all too much of what has happened. I mean, of course, there have been mistakes, and I probably have done many stupid things, but I tend to look towards the future. Looking forward to next summer, next fall, and so on, rather than thinking about what went wrong the last year.
Beautiful. And last question in the personal segment. What are you most passionate about, other than espresso?
I would say during the fall, I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to go skiing in the Norwegian mountains, and during the spring, I'm looking forward to taking my dogs and perhaps partly my wife with me to go hiking in the mountains with a tent. Basically, that's my summer vacation. When I get to that point, go into the mountains, the dogs will carry their own food, I'll carry my food, and we'll wander in the wilderness and really enjoy it. So that to me that's what I'm passionate about.
Beautiful, thank you. So let's talk about research, but because of your a different perspective, you got this unique insight. Very few people in the series is in the admin position. So I would like to ask you, both as an academic, as a researcher, and also as a person in the top of the food chain, in this case, how do you explain IB or your research to people who don't know you, who don't read your papers or academic journals in general? Why your research is important, why IB is important?
Okay, so I mean, my work has been on management issues in MNEs, but most of my work over the last 20 years has focused on people issues. So how are people managed? Why are they managed in a certain way, and with what kind of consequences? And obviously, it's a no-brainer that organizations consist of people, obviously there's lots of work on management. There's lots of work in organizing. There's lots of work on human resource management or people management, and obviously what we know, both as individuals ourselves or as middle managers or leaders in organizations, is that management matters. It matters for the individuals. There are few things as frustrating as having bad superiors, being in organizations that are negative, and so on. And we know that it has consequences. So therefore, doesn't matter if we talk about the US putting an individual on the moon in 1969, or a business school, how that is being managed, or an NGO. Everybody realizes that this is something that has consequences for the employees, for the owners, and for society.
Earlier, when you were a dean, obviously you're talking to the business school people. They are more focused on business. But now that you're a president of the entire university, how does your leadership style change to motivate people to move into bigger issues, bigger questions, more pressing, timely topics?
Well, obviously, when you start out as a superior, you know everybody, you can work with everyone. You can influence them, you can try to inspire them, you can learn from them, and so on. And obviously, the more you go up the food chain, as you put it, the more you have to work through others. You have to work through processes. But at the same time, I think an important part of the basics is still there. How to engage people. How to engage the organization in what you are trying to do, and of course also learning by engaging them about things that you got a little bit wrong yourself, and so on. So it's not only co-opting people or trying to persuade people to do what you started out with. It's also realizing all the times when you didn't get it entirely right the first time around. So to me, it's sticking very much to the same principles of engagement, and then I would say transparency is another thing that I come to think is extremely important. I mean, unless you're transparent, how can you be believable in terms of what you're trying to do? I mean, if there are things in a drawer that you don't want to anyone to know about, or if a journalist would call you and you cannot explain every major decision or practice, then you have a problem. So to me, that's the very simple rule. Coming to us, agreeing on things, and then being transparent about it.
How are things, or how have things shaped up or changed since you were an academic doing actual research papers versus the deanship and then the presidency? How have things progressed in the environment in academia, so that what should we expect in the next 5 to 10 years going forward?
Well, obviously, what has happened over the last decades and a couple of decades, and perhaps I should say at this point of time that I'm based in Finland, so part of the Nordic countries, and there's a certain way that academia works here. But what we see taking place here is a part of an institutionalization, a global institutionalization of how academia works. So the expectations, on faculty members, the systems, the tenure track systems have been introduced over the last decade, and all this has increased I would say the pressure on faculty members in terms of performance and so on. But the other thing that has happened, I think, is that in addition to increased pressure on the publication side, in particular, we have seen obviously an increased pressure, expectation on the part of universities and business schools to contribute to society. So there's also a critique of a too narrow-minded focus on getting that next A+ publication. Are you studying relevant issues? How does your research change the world? And so on. And obviously, if you read the academic top journals as well, over the last decade or so, there's been a lot of discussion about this, and there is a movement, I would say, of scholars, of people in admin positions like myself, of accreditation bodies, looking at research as something that should contribute to the world becoming a better place, not what we see today. The environment facing more and more challenges, and we are still not there, of course, in terms of addressing these. So I would say that on the one hand, you have this globalization and increased pressure and competition, and on the other hand, we've seen a broadening of what one looks at over and beyond research to, of course, teaching, but also societal impact and so on. Sorry for the long answer.
No.
Complicated issues.
This is great. About geopolitical environment, you mentioned the environment, climate change, obviously. You talked about globalization and increased competition. What else? What else do we face in the future, so that as a president, as a leader of the university, you're positioning the institution differently?
Obviously, if we could predict the future, we would probably not be here on the call. We would be making lots of money as consultants. But obviously, I think we will continue to see quite some volatility, and for instance, for universities, geopolitics is a big one. For instance, I'm based in Finland, just with the longest border with Russia in Europe. Finland just joined NATO, we have lost out to a very large extent the Russian students that used to come across the border to study with us. No collaboration, of course, with Russian universities. So this is a reality. International business, so to speak, from the point of view of a business school located in a country like this, is very much geopolitical one in the sense that we need to be prepared for this. We need to address these issues, and this is obviously part of our way to operate. And you can add to that how do you address things like obviously health issues. We have COVID, just came out of that. We have digitalization. We have chat GPT. We have the whole question of the structural education in the future. Obviously, we don't talk as much about the MOOCs being a tsunami that is just about to swallow the business schools and universities of the world, but still the educational landscape is changing. So
I'm so curious about ChatGPT and your take on it. What's your take on ChatGPT?
It's a challenge above all, but perhaps also a bit of an opportunity. Business schools, of course, are in the middle of it. So I don't think there are many business schools that haven't faced over the last few months a number of cases of students perhaps utilizing this tool in a little bit too flexible way. We have sort of a counter attack in terms of trying to come up with ways to hinder this or detect this. We have some who really try to build it into the learning process by asking students to actually use ChatGPT to solve some of the issues in class, and then reflecting on them critically and so on. And to me, it will. Of course, we don't know where we'll end up, but at least for the time being, it seems to me that having a combination of these ways to deal with this makes sense. That is, not to only see it as a problem, but also to see it as something that will be with us in the future. I just met an alumni of our business school today, and this person was saying that was on the board of a startup, not a very small one, but actually a fairly big one. And they had been discussing on the board the R&D strategy of the startup. And the CEO had suggested, okay, why don't we just put into ChatGPT a little bit of our company? The answer was 12 points was what ChatGPT suggested. And at the next board meeting, when they established the R&D strategy of that startup, 10 of those 12 points in one way or another were a part of that strategy. And these, I mean, the person who told this was a very, very experienced person, having worked in a major multinational in that area and very professional board and so on. So it indicates that these tools are actually going to be with us, and they can be very helpful. But at the same time, we need to obviously also have that critical perspective on these tools.
And this is actually fascinating. My MIS colleagues at the beginning of this craze, they were saying, "Oh, this is the next best thing ever, and everyone should incorporate it." And people like Noam Chomsky said, "Oh, this is the biggest plagiarism ever. We should never have it in the business school or any kind of school. It kills thinking or doing anything decent." I'm just going back and forth. And if the problem posited to ChatGPT is generic enough, and of course 12 points are produced and 10 are adopted, either the questions are very simple or the issues are very generic, or maybe we I go back to your earlier comment about bringing back the manager into the picture and how to manage an institution, how to manage an organization or startup. Maybe we're asking the wrong questions. Who was the most influential person for your upbringing in academia? Who was your mentor? Who was your advisor?
Jim March.
What did you learn from him?
Sarda March, Martin Simon, and so on. I was a PhD student when I had the fantastic opportunity. It was my supervisor in Finland, Guy Sevon, who knew Jim March, and they also co-authored a paper or two together, to go to Stanford as a PhD student. Young PhD student. I spent a year with him twice, actually. Did PhD courses at Stanford, got to know a number of people at Stanford. For me, it was partly Jim as a person. I mean, he taught me a number of things, like wine before work was one of his mottos. So you need, I mean, not with that the social aspect matters. I mean, that was the point, that you need to, I mean, and that to me still, and throughout my whole career has been an important one, that you end up preferably doing work together with people that you enjoy working with, that you enjoy being together with, and perhaps start with a cup of coffee, start with a glass of wine, start with a beer, start with a meal, and then gradually, if you get to know them, you will come up with ways to work together, and typically that will long-term be a good thing. But I would say, I mean, for those who didn't know Jim March, I mean, he was an extremely humble guy, although being one of the very, very smartest people around, extremely productive, extremely creative in his thinking. And so, for instance, one of the things he often did is that he would actually try to turn things around. So what if the causality is the opposite? If it's not A leading to B, it's B leading to A. I mean, decision making. I mean, the garbage can model of decision making. So it's not sort of the rationality of how to optimize the future expected value of something. It's the timing that matters. It's a completely different logic. So it's a completely different thing to make or way to make sense out of what is going on in terms of decision-making processes. So to me, he was both as an individual but also as a scholar, very influential, and obviously being exposed as a Finn to a top US university was extremely useful in itself. You try to stick to that level of ambition, and also when you have your PhD students who as PhD students could submit a paper to a top journal in their field and so on, so you at least have to believe yourself that you can do it yourself as well.
About now, you've seen many PhD students across the globe. What are some of the common mistakes that you see across all PhD students or junior faculty in the profession that people usually make, that you would say, don't do these mistakes, these are things to avoid?
I would say, at least in the Nordic context now, there's lots of pressure on people to graduate quickly and get your PhD done and so on. And I would say, enjoy the fact that you will never have as much time, as many opportunities to learn, to think, to read as a PhD student. You will never know the literature right at that point of time as well. So enjoy that period, and then try to be really have a really high level of ambition in what you do at that point of time. Afterwards, it's not that easy. So unless you work on something which is really interesting and you learn a lot at that stage, you will have a hard time later on in your career. perhaps that would be one. And then obviously coming back to Jim's wine before work. Make sure that you get to know people, that you socialize, that you build your social networks for pleasure, but also for work. It's a small world, and if you know people in your field, you gradually get to know them. You will have opportunities to work with people, and that will help you later on.
How did you network? You went to conferences. You were introduced by your advisors to someone. How did that process work for you?
I mean, for me, I would say that the Stanford connection was an important one. That I got to know people there, and then gradually starting to attend conferences. And I was a shy, fairly introvert guy, for me, it's never been sort of automatic to reach out and so on. But gradually over the years, I've learned that that's the way you just have to operate if you are to do reasonably well in this field. So yeah, conferences, workshops, and of course, when you attend these, as I think we all know, don't go to your room to prepare for the next presentation, but rather go to the bar, go to the cafeteria, meet with people. Conferences are not about making the perfect presentation. That perfect presentation you should prepare before you go there. And it doesn't matter if it's 100%, as long as you get to know people, you chat with people, and so on. That's more important.
That's very helpful, actually. Last question. What's the question that I should have asked you about heaven?
I think we actually got to talk about things that at least for me have been important ones. So yeah, I think that this was. I mean, you could have asked me, so why do you go into admin?
Well,
why do you take, because, and that's an interesting one, because for those who eventually possibly might watch this one or listen to this one, a typical answer I got myself when becoming a dean and now in my current position is, why do you do that? But at the same time, I have to say that these are at least for me, things that you typically don't apply for these positions. You end up in these positions. So as long as you do reasonably well in admin positions at different levels, you will end up here. And then I think it's also a question of enjoying it, or enjoying the fact that you're working with others, and hopefully then doing something out of it, making a little bit of your contribution to this world this way. I've written a few papers, but I still think that I'm made more of a difference in admin positions, and even as a teacher in the classroom, than through my own academic work. So I would encourage those who can imagine this kind of path to try it out, and then if you enjoy it, why don't you take the next step when you're asked, because you will be asked. You don't need to apply. The market works.
Beautiful. Ingmar, thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you. Thank you. Take care. I'll see you perhaps at one of these conferences. Hopefully we'll get coffee or in the bar. Definitely in the bar.